And, of course, our special guest tonight, Jim Marrs. We're going to take phone calls with Jim next hour. Lots more to talk with him about when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. And we're back with Jim Marrs. Jim, so this technology that the Nazis had, did they ever fly these saucers?
I believe they did. There is a scattering of evidence. And, of course, keep in mind, though, all this has been kept secret by everybody. The Nazis didn't want anybody to know they had this stuff, and so they kept it themselves. And any one of the powers that grabbed it, this was cutting-edge weaponry, they kept it secret. So it's been tough trying to prove all this up because everything's hidden away in these archives, classified. But we do know, of course, about the Foo Fighters, these balls of light that would chase Allied planes.
Mm-hmm.
And that apparently was the Feuerball, or the fireball, which has been stated was a highly original flying machine and was the prototype for flying saucers, present-day flying saucers. And then, of course, we had the Habanu. That was there are photographs of this thing, and what's amazing about the Habanu is that apparently used a kind of an electromagnetic type power source, very similar to what the inventor Otis T. Carr patented in 1957, which he called a fourth dimensional vehicle. And he said that any vehicle accelerated to an axis rotation relative to its attractive inertial mass immediately becomes activated by free space energy. That was interesting that he mentioned that long before we heard about 0-point energy. Right. And it acts as an independent force. So apparently, and then the other thing that amazes me is the photographs, the drawings, the schematics that I've seen of this Habanu look amazingly like the photographs that George Adamski produced back in the 50s. You know, this is kind of the fat saucer with kind of a round pillbox-looking thing on the top of it, and these globes underneath that apparently were part of the propulsion system. And of course, then they, before the end of the war, they reportedly were working on the Flugelrad series. But again, this is a situation where it was just a little too late. And the question is, what happened to them? In my book, Alien Agenda, I make the argument that perhaps some of this saucer technology was transferred to America and or Britain, again, in exchange for immunity. Keep in mind, for example, at the end of the war, General Patton's army drove right up to the outskirts of Berlin and then were ordered to pull back. About 100 miles and just sit there and let the Russians fight. And
he went ballistic, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
Patton?
Oh yeah. And he didn't survive the war either, as you recall.
That's right.
But I know that for a fact because I can remember as a kid, my uncle was with Patton's army and would tell me stories about driving his Jeep around in the outskirts of Berlin. The thing is, the Germans would give up en masse to the Allies, to the Western Allies, Britain, America. I mean, whole divisions would come in, lay down their arms. But for the Russians, they fought them tooth and toenail. And they fought, in the Battle of Berlin was just indescribably horrible because there was just intense fighting for every square block, every house almost. So they obviously looked with, the Nazis looked on the Americans and the British with a lot more uneasiness than they would the Russians. So I make the argument that they may have turned over some of their saucer technology, and that was why at the end of the war that the American-British consortium, Avro, came in, and they were going to build a ship that they said would fly thousands of miles an hour and could make 90-degree turns and was circular in shape, and it sounds exactly like a saucer. And they were building this at the Avro plant in Western Canada. Now, of course, later, by the late 50s, they finally rolled out the Avro car, and it was a saucer-shaped thing. It wobbled down the runway a little bit, and they said, nah, sorry, it just really doesn't work.
Yeah.
But then there are those who believe that it just went into deeper classification. And what's amazing about that, George, is because, as you mentioned earlier, it was Kenneth Arnold who first brought flying saucers to the
public's attention.
Yeah, to the public. And where did he see those saucers? Around Mount Rainier.
That's right.
And where did they fly? Back up north into northern Canada, right where the Avro plant was. But I also will add that if you'll think about it, George, when the term flying saucer came into being, when he mentioned the word saucer, he was not talking about a description of the shape of these craft. He was talking about their aerodynamics. He said they kind of wobble through the air and kind of skipped along, kind of like a saucer skipping over water. And the news media picked that up, and just from then on, they called them flying saucers. But the reason that I think that that's pertinent is because I've seen the drawing that Kenneth Arnold himself made of the craft he saw, and they were not perfectly circular. They were kind of crescent moon shaped, okay? Very similar to some of the craft that the Germans were working.
Right. And also, wasn't it similar to what they talked about crashed at Roswell?
Yes, exactly. And I think you're going to be hearing more about that in the future. I'm not at liberty to go into that, but I think you're onto something there.
Very fascinating. Well, you know, I'm convinced we've been visited, but at the same time, I think a lot of these UFO sightings are craft that are made on this planet.
Right. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Now, but again, let's be very clear here. This is not an either-or situation. It's not that all reports of UFOs are either just misidentified terrestrial craft, whether ours or some enemies or even some hidden Nazis, and that there's no such thing as ETs. I think we're dealing with both. And this could explain the extreme secrecy that has been laid down over that whole subject because, think about it. Number one, they don't want anybody to know about any really truly secret advanced technology that we're working on. Two, they certainly don't want the public to know that there might be some potential enemy out there that has technology that supersedes our own. And three, you add to the fact that some of this technology that's been flying around is not even human. Now you can begin to understand the depth of the secrecy that's been laid upon the whole subject.
Jim, John Searle was on with me last week talking about his thoughts of a magnetic energy device. He calls it the SEC energy generator. And he is convinced that some of these machines are working on magnetics, propulsion systems based on magnetics. Were you ever able to find anything that would tell you what kind of propulsion technology they had?
Well, yes, I think that there is a growing consensus that it's something that combines zero-point energy. It's energy manipulation, and you can do that, of course, with magnetics, but you can do it with vortex gravitics. Okay, if you can, if you'll think about it. Think of our solar system. Here's the sun and all the planets, and they all rotate in a circle around the sun, right?
Yeah.
And then you go out and think about all the pictures you've seen of the galaxies, other galaxies out there, and they're all kind of a pinwheel-looking thing. They spin around, What makes them spin?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay.
It's got to be tied together.
Yeah, so we're getting into advanced theoretical physics and quantum physics, and I think that we're dealing with energy fields. And if you can create an energy field, now here's where it gets spooky. if you can create an energy field that can nullify gravity,